Welcome everybody to the launch of the FAO's flagship publication, The State of Food and Agriculture 2023. And this year it's going to be revealing the true costs of food in our agri-food systems, a key measure if we are to meet those 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Claire Dool and I'm your moderator. A couple of housekeeping points. There is simultaneous translation in the 6 UN languages. It's webcast and you can find it on the FAO website. We are going to be taking questions from our in-house audience and microphones will go round. And of course, we'd very much like to encourage you to spread the word and use the hashtag SOFA2023 or hashtag True Cost of Food. So, if we really want to understand the true cost of food, we have to understand the real impact on how we produce, transport, process, and consume food. And this year's report covers 154 countries, and FAO hopes that it's going to be a useful guide for policymakers when they're making decisions. So to find out more about this, let's watch this short video.
Food. It nurtures us. It connects us. The journey of food from farm to table creates jobs and shapes our land and cultures. But agri-food systems have huge hidden costs to the environment, our health, and society. Those hidden costs are rarely reflected in market prices and traditional economic analysis, but we ignore them at our peril. If we want to stop climate change and protect biodiversity, design more resilient and sustainable agri-food systems, ensure access to healthy diets that allow people to thrive, and address poverty and inequality. We need to get better at accounting for these hidden costs and acting to address them. Our new report makes the case for using true cost accounting to measure the real impact of how we produce, transport, process, and consume food. This in turn will allow decision makers to design and apply the best solutions to address the hidden costs that affect us all. FAO is responding to this essential need by dedicating for the first time 2 consecutive issues of the State of Food and Agriculture report to the same theme. This year's report reveals that the hidden costs of our agri-food systems are at least $10 trillion a year. That's nearly 10% of global GDP. The highest costs are to people's health, from poor diets leading to obesity and non-communicable diseases, mostly affecting high and upper middle income countries. 1/5 of the total costs are environmental, including from greenhouse gas emissions. Low-income countries are hit hardest by social hidden costs caused by poverty and undernourishment. These preliminary results show the need to produce deeper, national-level analysis to help policymakers address these costs by enabling comparisons of different levers, from subsidy and tax reforms to new regulations to voluntary guidelines. Next year's report will focus on these more targeted assessments. We have a huge opportunity to transform agri-food systems for the better, realizing benefits for people and planet, and setting us on a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive course for the future.
It's now my pleasure to ask the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization, Dr. Xu Dongyu, to officially launch the report and to say a few words to us. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Dear colleagues, first of all, thank you all of you to make your time available to participate in this important event. I'm pleased to launch the 2023 edition of the State of Food and Agriculture SOFA report. This year's edition focuses on the importance of revealing the true cost of food for effective transformation of a global agri-food system. The findings highlight that our agri-food system stands at the critical juncture. The escalated challenges confronting our world, from the climate crisis, the biodiversity loss, to the health crisis, malnutrition, and the rising food price, among many others, have made it clear that the business as usual is no longer an option. The choice we make now, the priority we set, and the solution we implement will determine the new path we need to follow towards a better future. An essential condition for realizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and to reaching the target across a number of SDGs in transforming agri-food system to increase their efficiency, resilience, inclusiveness, and sustainability. Agri-food systems are complex. It is critical that our action within this system be transparent if we are to achieve the SDGs in a coherent manner. FAO is responsible to this need by dedicating two constitutive issues of SOFA, the first time since its launch in 1947. That's why we always say we're not allowed to run in business as usual. You did so many years. It shows the long-term commitment as an organization. But at the same time, we need the reform, rebuild, yeah? Rethinking even, in a little bit new, not revolutionary, and that's what we call the transformation, not the revolutionary. And no, it's a process of change. I encourage all of my colleagues to look at when you say the true cost, what it means. You said the environment, social, economic, but I learned from economists, should be direct cost first. Yeah, even a lot of countries, they didn't calculate the direct cost because a lot of countries, they didn't consider the cost of land and or even cost of the water. They didn't consider, because a lot of farmers consider the water is free for the ground. They use it for generation to generation. So please establish a scientific way to look at the direct cost, all the agriculture input from soil, water, seeds, fertilizer, chemicals, whatever. And then indirect cost. You are still used to your old narratives. Let's keep a little bit distance from the public imagination. What is the indirect cost? Should we look at the environment impact cost from different regions, different households, even family farmers in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, you name it, in Latin America, are different indirect cost. Yeah? And the third is implication beyond your village, even beyond your country, territory. That's part of the indirect cost and also part of the public responsibility. It's not a question of cost. It's not a question of economy issues. That's why they build a linkage with the global agenda, not only on the Paris Agreement and others. So I think we have a lot of things to improve. And the third, I think also, we need to improve, look at all the commodities, not only traditional commodities we list. So during the past 75 years, 76 years, since 1947. What is new? Because 50 years ago, the animal feed is not from staple food. Only few developed countries, in Europe and America, they consider the animal feed, they use the staple food. But more and more in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa even, sooner or later, they will use staple food for animal feed. So there are certain level of competition between the man the human beings' food security and animal feed security. So that's 3 aspects. So I encourage the ambassador of the Switzerland, and she is expert so on the trade. I hope she can also, with some small action to support that, lead us to change this software to fit the purpose, not only for trade, and for food security, feed security, and others. Environmental security, you can say that. So, and I encourage my colleagues to have a more innovative ideas and professional way to discuss with our members. Last but not least, I think this report, it's another step. And the chief economist's guidance, and we can use software, not only for our own enjoyment, always a karaoke. Yeah? Every year they have the lunching ceremony and so on. Let's work together with other important international forums, like G7, G20, BRICS, and so on. Just half a day before, we can work together with the host countries, the presidential country. Here, G7, next year will be the Italy, and G20 will be Brazil. So let's have a coherent release or launching, not play our own silo games here. Go out of the castle. FAO is not a castle, but so many years behave like living in the castle. I always encourage my colleagues to go street, not for demonstration, but for protest, but go street to talk with the people, to the farmers, to the consumers. That's also launching the software, you name it. We have so many publications. But not only the interview by the chief economist or director of the relevant divisions. We need to get all the big politicians and the private sectors, CEOs, to take the ownership, to use our publications for their own business. So I wish you all the best. Let's work together. And I had a quite long discussion with David the other days. And we should change our business. And of course, we can have an official lunch here, but how to make it more accessible to the society, to the international impactful platform. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director General, and a very clear call to action there about if we are to undergo this transformation of our agri-food systems, then it's really a collective action of all sectors of society. So to find out more about what is in this report, I'm delighted to ask the author and also the senior economist at FAO, Dr. Andrea Cataneo, to explain to us some of the startling conclusions and findings.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, DG, for those inspiring words. It is an opportunity for us, this SOFA, given that we will continue, as you mentioned, into next year, to bring these results out to stakeholders and reach out more, as you suggested. We are in the phase of preparing country profiles, and we look forward to exchanging this information and get feedback throughout the year on this topic. So let me just start by saying that it is a real pleasure to present these results. The theme of this year's SOFA is revealing the true cost of food to transform agri-food systems, as was mentioned. It is a particularly relevant theme because many of the impacts of agri-food systems, both positive and negative, are not included in the market prices, which shape incentives to produce, process, distribute, consume, and dispose of agri-food products. So they're thus hidden and generally not considered in the day-to-day decisions of agri-food actors. And this gives rise to consequences, both good and bad, that are not always visible. And that is why it's vital that the impacts of our actions within agri-food systems are made more transparent. So the objective of this year's SOFA is indeed to uncover these hidden impacts of agri-food systems and contribute to improve their environmental, social, and economic sustainability. And the aspect of improving is, in fact, quite important in terms of what will this lead to. As such, this report adopts an approach, true cost accounting, to assess these hidden impacts. Using the approach, the report presents a preliminary quantification of the hidden costs of agri-food systems for 154 countries. The report uses global sources with country-level and annual data, and it recognizes the level of uncertainty in its estimates and provides a range for that uncertainty. So that's important. I mean, we come out with big global estimates, but we're also acknowledging the uncertainty surrounding them and are open to debate on these numbers. It then moves to provide guidance on how to conduct more targeted agri-food system assessments that go beyond the national-wide estimates that are presented in this report. Because more detail is needed when it comes to truly providing guidance to policymakers. It also discusses the role of these assessments in implementing different levers for transforming agri-food systems. So, in the next year's report, as was mentioned, for the first time, we will have the same theme, and it will focus more on the empirical applications of TCA through case studies around the world. The case studies will include targeted country-specific analysis that will help guide decision makers, and specifically help identify trade-offs and synergies among possible interventions and policy options. So by having both editions dedicated to this topic, FAO is paving the way for agri-food systems assessments to be part and parcel to decision making. And why is that? Well, because agri-food systems touch our lives in so many ways that we cannot ignore these hidden impacts. Now, let's be clear. The value of agri-food systems is not in doubt. Agri-food systems bring great benefits to us through jobs, food, and culture. But they also generate significant hidden costs that impact the environment, society, and health, and negatively affect nearly all countries. It is essential that these hidden costs are assessed and valued through rigorous accounting, and this information is used to reduce the hidden costs. So true cost accounting, known also as TCA, is a systemic approach to measure and value the environmental, social, health, and economic costs and benefits generated by agri-food systems. It's systemic in the sense that it looks at these different dimensions at the same time as opposed to looking at them separately, as is often the case. And its objective is to improve decision making. But before diving into the estimation of these hidden costs, it is important to understand why these exist to begin with. In most cases, these are caused by market, institutional, and policy failures, whereby resources are not allocated efficiently or opportunities for sustainable development are not seized, are not implemented. So these failures generate losses that are not reflected in market prices, and so the hidden costs. Water pollution from fertilizers provides a classic example. Although it can be reduced with the right practices, it may come at a private cost to farmers for which they have no incentives, or they may not have appropriate information on those practices. So this reduces the quantity of safe water with negative consequences for human health and the environment. Another example, from a distributional perspective, is how many agri-food systems workers are poor, despite an abundance of profits downstream in food supply chains. That is another hidden impact of how our agri-food systems function. To complete the picture, there are the hidden costs associated with unhealthy dietary patterns that we will see, that can arise from lack of information about the impacts of consuming highly processed foods of low nutritional value. So the challenge is, how do these impacts in different dimensions compare, and how do they stack up? How do we look at them together? So we examine hidden costs along the value chains, from inputs and primary production all the way to consumers. The model used in the analysis was paired with FAO and other global sources that contain data for multiple countries and time periods on, as you can see in the green bar, greenhouse gases, nitrogen emissions, land use change, and blue water use. Then there are also those impacts linked to poverty among those employed in the agri-food sector and undernourishment. The undernourishment is looked at in the case of this report through productivity losses associated with not being able to carry out a productive day, whereas the poverty among those employed in the agri-food sector is thought of as what type of transfer would you need to eliminate moderate poverty in the agri-food sector. And finally, we have the unhealthy dietary patterns that are at the consumption level, and as we will see, are quite substantial. So looking at the global values, how do these stack up? How do they compare? Well, we have that in aggregate, agri-food systems generated an expected hidden cost of 12.7 trillion purchasing power parity dollars in 2020. So the environmental hidden costs are approximately 2.9 trillion and account for about 20% of the hidden costs globally. Social hidden costs are at 571 billion, and health hidden costs account for the majority of these costs, of these hidden costs, being more than 9 trillion or 73%. So these total costs are equivalent to about 10% of global GDP, which really kind of, I think, sends home a message that real change is needed in agri-food systems. To give you a kind of a more intuitive sense, per day, these costs are equivalent to $35 billion. That's nearly $5 a day for the agri-food sector. So the biggest impact is, in fact, on the side of nitrogen emissions, mostly from runoff to surface waters and ammonia emissions to air. These are followed by contributions of greenhouse gas emissions that account for about 1/3 of the environmental costs, and then land use change and water. So if one looks at the hidden costs of agri-food systems, these differ substantially by income group. So it's important to kind of bring these results down to, at least here I bring them down to the income group, but at the country level, because at the end, it is stakeholders within countries that will make the decisions on how to change or not food systems. So this figure quantifies the hidden costs by main category and country income group, and they differ not only in their magnitude, but also in their composition. So the first observation that stands out is that most hidden costs are generated in upper middle income and high income countries. Those are the lower two bars. The lower middle income countries account for about 22%, and low income countries really only for 3% of these costs. Now, in all country groups apart from the low income, it is the productivity losses from dietary patterns that are the most significant contributor. So this might give the impression that hidden costs are a problem only in high income countries, but it really depends on how you look at it. So the perspective of where hidden costs are more challenging changes if you look at them relative to GDP, where market transactions are included. And what we see is that the results look very different. So comparing these costs to GDP gives a sense of a burden these hidden costs place on national economies and provide an indication as to where to prioritize resources to address these costs. As a share of GDP, costs are relatively much higher in low-income countries, even though in absolute terms they are much smaller. At an average of 27% of GDP, in large part driven by poverty and undernourishment. So the ratio of hidden costs instead to GDP is for lower and upper middle income countries in the range of 11 to 12%. However, social hidden costs, which are clearly very important in the low income countries, are of notable relevance only in lower middle income countries. So we see how the shift in priorities occurs as income level of countries changes. And in high income countries, the ratio is lower at about 8%. So as I was trying to convey, the narrative changes dramatically when looking at the issues relative to the average income earned, highlighting that even though globally social costs are the smallest of the hidden costs, they are likely the priority in low-income countries. Not a surprising result, but it is a confirmation of what you would expect people to believe are their priorities. So in the national level estimates, that we have presented, they are preliminary and serve a purpose of really of awareness building. We can go, however, a step further with true cost accounting to carry out more targeted analysis, which can further help set priorities for change. So the scope of TCA analysis can be adjusted based off of the needs of the decision makers. For instance, the unit of analysis can be a specific agri-food system, value chain, or looking at dietary patterns. So breaking down the problem, starting from this more systemic vision, but tailoring it to the needs of the countries and the specific stakeholders. So targeted TCA analysis also allow us to explore scenarios. So starting to think about different actions and by what extent can you reduce these hidden costs? And what are the implications? And finally, it also helps kind of make that link to assess policies before and after they're put in place. So, and that brings us to the levers. Because the end goal of the TCA analysis is that it helps inform decisions. And decisions happen all across agri-food systems. And we can consider these as levers for agri-food system transformation. So, for example, agri-food supply chains are influenced by trade and market interventions, fiscal subsidies, laws and regulations, and public and private capital. Likewise, food consumption is influenced by various levers, including those that affect consumer pocketbooks and those that influence food purchasing decisions. And finally, general services and support to public goods, such as public investments to research and development, R&D, and infrastructure, affect the functioning of agri-food systems, can also be influenced. These levers are not new, but could be tweaked differently, based or realigned to better support the transition to sustainable agri-food systems when they're informed through the systemic approach. So, as I mentioned, that you can see different decision makers, governments have a role in all of these different levers, and therefore informing where the entry points might be best is, I think, quite valuable. Research and civil society organizations also play a significant role across they're present in terms of influencing laws and regulations, but also looking at consumer purchasing power, directing consumption, marketing and promotion, labeling and certification, and also on the general services and support to public goods. Clearly, research, academic institutions have a big role in research and development, but also knowledge transfer services. You often see it in civil society and academia both, and in inspection services. And finally, business and financial institutions. I mean, the agri-food systems are essentially a private sector endeavor. So private capital is huge. The bulk of capital in agri-food systems is private. So influencing how private capital is used and directed will have a big role. But similarly also marketing and promotion, clearly private sector, big role, labeling and certification, and very much also in the R&D part with specific objectives in mind. So one question that arises is, what does addressing these hidden costs imply, right? And there is a concern among consumers and policymakers about what will happen to food prices if you factor in the hidden costs. Now, we have just seen the different levers that can affect change. There are a lot of ways that you can change how agri-food systems function. So this was meant to convey that addressing the root causes of hidden costs is more than simply passing these hidden costs on to either producers or consumers. It's about structural change. So it aims to reduce these costs in the longer run. So prices, the point we need to make is that uncovering the true cost of food need not imply overall higher food prices. For certain foods, such as environmentally strenuous or highly processed foods with substantial hidden costs, prices may increase. However, prices of nutritious and whole foods would likely become more competitive and relatively cheaper. So the bottom line is that better policies and investments in more sustainable agri-food systems can reduce hidden costs without increasing the burden on families in terms of expenditure of food. Now, so taking into account the hidden costs and benefits of agri-food systems is therefore critical to FAO's vision of transitioning to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems. The findings of the SOFA report are clear. I mean, the global cost of inaction is very high. I mean, these hidden costs are a cost of inaction. The fact that they are hidden does not make them any less real, especially to the people upon which these hidden costs fall. And they are substantial in all countries. If you look at the numbers that are coming out of for the 154 countries that we looked at, it is substantial everywhere. So to build momentum for action, concrete examples of how assessments of the impacts of agri-food systems can affect change are required. And that's the plan in terms of moving forward beyond this SOFA 2023 and SOFA 2024. And this is a need particularly in data and resource-constrained contexts. So FAO aims to mobilize resources to scale up such assessments and build momentum and engagement among members and all stakeholders shaping future policymaking. This commitment is expressed by the 2 consecutive editions of the State of Food and Agriculture, as already mentioned, being devoted to this topic. But this year's SOFA report is also a complement to other ongoing work at FAO on these issues. So the ambition of these parallel streams of work is to catalyze action and transformation by providing concrete examples of how targeted assessments can affect transformational change. So on that note, I thank you for listening. This report is just a first step in a process to think about solutions in a more systemic manner. We hope that it builds momentum and inspire all to take meaningful action that will steer our agri-food system towards sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for sharing some of those staggering figures. Please come and take a seat here, because if you've got questions about the report, as the author, Andrea is the go-to person for answering your questions when we get to that. And of course, I'm sure one of the things that was on your mind as policymakers or as consumers is whether it means the prices go up or not. And if I've understood it, it was a very clear, it depends. So we'll dig a bit deeper into that one, I'm sure. 154 countries, and we're delighted that we've got some representatives to discuss their thoughts on this report. we have from Switzerland, Brazil, and the US. So Christina Bender is the ambassador and permanent representative of Switzerland to the FAO, and as the Director General was saying, is an expert on trade. You've headed up teams negotiating trade agreements, and you have been an advisor to the Minister of Agriculture in Switzerland. So welcome, Christina. Carla Barrosa Carneiro, permanent representative of Brazil. We all know that Brazil is a very important commodity producing country, and Carla has also taken a very active role and led teams in a public consultation that's ongoing at the moment on an ESG framework on water. And joining remotely from the United States at a really unnaturally early hour, I won't ask you to do the calculations. Kathleen, I do hope that you've managed to set your alarm. Kathleen is the former Deputy Secretary and Chief Operating Officer at the US Department of Agriculture and the current Executive Director of the SWE-T Center for Sustainable Food Systems at Arizona State University. So thank you, Kathleen, for getting up so early. 4 a.m., as the Director General has just reminded us all. So I think that is beyond the call of duty. Thank you, Kathleen. Just wanting to check that you can hear us and see us.
I can. All good.
Super. Thank you. So the findings of the report showed that in high and middle income countries, the highest hidden cost was in health. Christina, did that surprise you? If you just switch it on, speak and it will.
Maybe. No, it's on.
And it will happen.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. I mean, the first time I was presented with results, I was extremely surprised. And especially seeing that they are much bigger than the environmental cost. So this was the biggest surprise for me. Knowing that we have been working for, I don't know, 20 plus years on reducing the environmental impact of agriculture production, processing and consumption. But then after second thought, it seems a little bit logical because, of course, we want to produce sustainably and we want to eat and transform our diets to be healthy and also sustainable, but those are still two silos. We don't have a policy for sustainable and healthy diets, including the production. And for my country, of course, we import 50% of what we consume, so we don't have our own policy for that. And I don't think, our the clients from where we purchase our food have either in the majority of the cases. So in the end, it seems logical, yeah.
Absolutely, it's very broad-ranging. What about you, Carla? Any thoughts or surprises when you saw that health was the highest hidden cost in Brazil?
Yes, so first of all, thank you so very much for being here. I think FAO's flagship reports are a global public good, and they should be maintained as such. One of the reasons for that is because they raise awareness, and so they have these very impressive numbers, like 10 trillion, and they challenge us. So when I received this invitation and I began to read the summary, because there was not much time for more than that, I was, first of all, very surprised by why is FAO talking about costs of agriculture? Shouldn't we be talking about benefits of agriculture? So this was the first surprise that I have. But anyway, I think FAO should challenge us. So this is the first thing, and it did. The second thing is, as for the results concerning nutrition. So this actually doesn't surprise us in Brazil. We do understand that agri-food systems are cross-cutting, and their impacts go through the whole of society. What we do think might be interesting to take a look at is the prevalence of undernourishment. So here we talk about mainly about choices of people that have the choices. But what about people that don't have the choices? So this is one thing that maybe has surprised me a little bit. And as for challenges, I want to make a challenge. So I just had lunch, kind of a 10-minute lunch at FAO Polish room or something. And I went for a salad and a tramezzino. And the salad was €5 and the tramezzino was €1. So this is one thing that maybe we should take a look at. Why those choices that are made every day to people, why are they not made easier for us? What could governments do to make the salad €1 and the tramezzino €5? So this is one thing that maybe I think we should be looking at. And maybe the other report that we have next year will help us answering that question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that many of the representatives are very keen to give their recommendations for the next report. Staying with this current report, Kathleen, you have done quite a lot on true cost accounting. So I'm wondering whether the findings of this report, the preliminary findings, are they coherent with the sort of work that you've done on true cost accounting in the United States?
Thank you, Claire. First of all, let me just say congratulations to the Director General, the Chief Economist, Andre and his team for the release of this incredible SOFA flagship report, as you said. It's really exciting, and it's about hidden costs. And I just want to say hidden costs are externalities, both positive and negative, that aren't calculated into the costs that we pay for food at the grocery. So while the SOFA is a first of its kind global assessment, I will say I'm not super surprised because there's been a lot of work that's been going on leading up to this moment. The United Nations Environment Program, the TEEB agri-food effort over many years, the Sustainable Food Trust, TMG, Think Tank for Sustainability in Berlin, the Natural Capitals Coalition, private firms like Astronaut Ventures, the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, and many others. But to your point, the Rockefeller Foundation came out with a report a couple years ago looking at the true cost accounting of the American food system, and actually their numbers are much higher. They looked at 14 metrics, said that at the grocery, Americans are paying about $1.1 trillion a year in food, but that the actual cost, when you take into account those externalities, was 3 times as much, meaning 3.2 trillion. So those numbers are much higher than what the SOFA has for the U.S. food system, but they're very consistent on where the bulk of those hidden costs are, and those are in unhealthy diets. The SOFA says that 85% of hidden costs in the U.S. comes from unhealthy diets, not unlike other high-income countries, which they say are 84% of hidden costs. The SOFA does have this part about deforestation in the U.S. that I don't truly understand, that there's a lot of deforestation going now to have pastures for livestock production. That doesn't mesh with my understanding, but here's the thing. What the SOFA says very clearly is that this is just a starting point and it requires follow-up. So policymakers, all of us who are concerned about agri-food systems should do that follow-up. I will on my own. This is the launch of a critical and overdue global dialogue. In terms of low-income countries, I'll just mention that to follow on what Andrea said, is that their hidden costs are really social costs as opposed to the high-income countries. So poverty, undernourishment. Is this surprising? I think also very consistent. Just consider the role of women farmers across the globe. FAO and the World Bank have put out analyses prior to this SOFA that say that if women were given the same access to education, land tenure, resources in terms of leadership, training, that we would produce enough food to feed 150 million more people a day. So that really goes to what the SOFA says, that we really need to think about the incomes of moderately poor working people in agri-food systems, particularly in low-income countries where the recommendation is that their wages need to increase by as much as 57%. So hopefully all countries, no matter what income level, will review these results and get to work on addressing them.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you very much, because of course we have middle and high income representatives on this panel, but your institute takes a more of a global reach, and that giving your thoughts on the impact for low income countries. Let's just find out what's being done at the moment by our country representatives. Carla, on these costs and benefits, these externalities, what sort of work are you doing, and has any of that work translated into policy initiatives?
Well, yes, it has. So Brazil has, since 2010, been implementing a program that is called ABC, which stands for Low Carbon Agriculture. This program, it gives incentives to producers, whether they may be big producers or smallholder farmers, so that they can implement best practices. So I think the first and more important thing that Brazil did was to identify what were those best practices, what were the practices that were the benchmark in sustainable agriculture. And then after you do that, then you provide stimulus for the producers to adopt those practices. So I would dare say that this is the more important program that we have. It has been given credits for agriculture producers for more than 10 years, and we're just moving to a new phase that will begin next year.
Thank you. What about Switzerland? What are you doing on externalities at the moment?
Yeah, thank you. So we have been, like I said before, we have been working on trying to transform the production of agriculture. And now, since last year, we launched a report on the future orientation of the agriculture policy, which for the first time encompasses the food system as a whole. We are very much looking forward to participating in next year's SOFA, but also to get inspired as a country to repurpose our subsidies. Because, you know, we have quite a few subsidies for agriculture production, and the idea of working on true cost is to also better define how to repurpose those subsidies as a first step. Yeah.
So I live in Switzerland, so I know all about the subsidized agriculture there. Kathleen, you have been, as I said before, doing some work on that. Countries have their own methodologies. What would you say was the advantage for you of this true cost accounting approach?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think many of us in public life have had those moments where I say, oops, I made a mistake. I didn't know. So for me, TCA makes those hidden costs visible. It creates that necessary transparency for good decision-making in the public and private sector. So an example from my current work at the Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems, done in collaboration with Colorado State University professors, we've been looking at cow-calf operations in the American West. So here we are in the US, right? At the same time, we have cattle production under a magnifying glass because there's concerns about how much red meat should be consumed in a healthy diet. And we're also very concerned about greenhouse gas emissions, and we know cattle are a big part of that. And yet, at the same time, rural America is under the magnifying glass. We have an out-migration of youth from the rural countryside. And President Biden just last week launched a rural tour and talking about the need to reinvest in rural America to stop that out-migration and improve the quality of life. So in our report looking at cow-calf operations in the American West, we recognize that there's 70,000 ranchers that are consuming about 73% of the land. And they're contributing social capital in various ways in terms of supporting rural businesses, community well-being. They're supporting environmental capital in terms of supporting wildlife and biodiversity in different ways. So policymakers here are in a tough spot. They need to understand the trade-offs of different policy interventions and calibrate those interventions so that they don't end up in one of those, oops, I made a mistake moments. So I do think TCA is the key tool to help with that.
Thank you. Indeed, obviously, lots of challenges for policymakers. They often have to make decisions and trade-offs. What do you think is the challenge with TCA, Kathleen, in actually mainstreaming TCA or embedding it in policy?
Well, of course, none of us like to change, right? So there's the whole age-old reluctance to change. But some people are fearful of the complexity of TCA. If you look at all the underlying documents of the SOFA report, there's a lot of data. There's modeling. That's true of our own cow-calf operation report. I like the Rockefeller study that I mentioned before because you can go to the underlying documents, but their public-facing report that most of us read just has the headlines. People shouldn't worry. Governments have experts. Most governments across the globe now do some sort of cost-benefit analysis. And what I'm really hoping that we get to a point where we switch out TCA for cost-benefit analysis because it's already embedded in decision-making in governments, and yet TCA is much more robust and takes account of these externalities. I don't think it has to be super complex either because while some studies will get it down to the penny about what things cost, we're really looking for the directionality. What do we need to change in the U.S.? Well, clearly the SOFA says it's largely about dietary interventions. That's important to know. We also do face some data gaps. As everyone in the room knows, FAO really began as a statistical agency collecting global data across the globe so we understand what's going on. Over time, a lot of governments have stopped making the same kind of investments they used to in terms of data collection, and that's the public good. And so we really can use this moment at SOFA also to say, what are countries collecting for data? What needs do we have to really understand the true cost accounting of food?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Some of those challenges, the scarcity of data. And Christina, I think that in Switzerland there's some initial studies and academic work that's being done on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a big project which is going to try to trickle down all these assumptions and you know, if I take just an example, how much of an unhealthy or unhealthy diet is due to the diet and how much of it is due to lack of exercise. You know, these things are still at the level of assumption. So what we're going to do in a 4-year project is an academic project to try to really make this data more granular and really see, also for the help of policymakers, but also other private stakeholders, to gather that data from them so they can also make their own decisions. So this is something that from the global needs to be coming down at the national level, yeah, data collection, yeah.
More data collection, more data analysis, and then of course you've got to get the different ministries all talking to each other.
Yeah, hopefully once you see, like the preliminary, this SOFA report today shows us, I think people need to sit at the same table, you know, because they cannot make their own policies without impacting the ones of the other ministries, yeah. Eventually, yeah, we hope so.
Kathleen, we've talked a lot about diet and environment, and of course you could say that they are the concerns of middle income, high income countries. I mean, do you think that this approach is also a useful tool for the low income countries, and how would you think that they might be able to use it?
Well, absolutely. I don't think that there's any policymaker that won't find use to this. We need to understand what these hidden costs are to make good policy interventions. So I think it goes without saying, low, medium, high income countries across the board, we need true cost accounting. And this SOFA is not just a document that tries to account for a lot of those true costs, but also it's really a challenge to all of us to rethink how we're doing normal business practices in government.
Carla, you started off by saying what you wanted in the next report. Let's hear from Kathleen and also from Christina on that. Give us a bit of a recap. That was all of 15 minutes ago. But what would you like to see also in the next report that you think would be useful from your perspective?
Yeah, so first of all, I do think it's very stimulating to take a look at a methodology that I wasn't familiar with before. So it's challenging, it's stimulating, and it's good that a flagship report brings on a methodology that is not that well known, that mainstreamed yet. Still, I do think that true cost accounting opportunity of taking into account in a more visible way the benefits, the true benefits of agriculture for landscaping, for traditional values, for cultural values. Of course, evidence-based policies are very important for us all as policymakers, but still, the fact that we have an evidence in itself must not be sacred. So I would give you one example. Kathleen mentioned that FAO began as statistic body, which is kind of, well, exactly not how it began, but anyway, FAO now is harbor to many indexes in the SDGs, for example, but it also was a harbor to the land use indicator. And I think 5 years ago in Brazil, we kind of got to know that FAO only uses one crop a year as an estimate for when you don't have enough data available. And in Brazil and in lots of other countries, you have 2 and 3 crops a year. So this is just an example, and it has been changed and all, but evidence is not sacred. Evidence should be a work in progress. Evidence should be taken into account as an analysis that should be done. So this is what I would very much like to see in the next report, a true cost and benefit analysis of agriculture.
Andrea, I'm sure, is mentally noting these, and we'll come to Andrea in a moment. Christina, I wonder whether you wanted to pick up on this idea of more of a focus on benefits, or what would you like to see in the next report?
No, of course, I agree with that. I mean, first of all, I would like to thank the FAO for producing the first, analytical framework, which we can all base our next steps on. This is the first time, and I think it's important because otherwise everybody would do their own things in their corner. That's why we're participating next SOFA also together with the FAO. The second thing is, of course, if I can make my wish list for the next SOFA, and also that inspires then policymakers, but not only policymakers, also private stakeholders in Switzerland, because as Andrea showed us, this could address a lot of stakeholders. I would hope for an analysis of the true cost accounting on the benefits, so to encourage us to continue having the transformation of food systems and not just banning things or, making it, always more and more problematic. And secondly, which of these costs can we actually address as policymakers, as private stakeholders, as civil society? And what are the policy options? Because for the moment, it's very open what you want to do with this. I mean, you have the data, we approve, we accept the data, but do we do something with the data? Is it possible as a policymaker to,
And you've got to get the big food industry, the Nestle's in Switzerland on board, and
exactly.
to see the benefits of this too.
Yeah, so this is not the end of the road, really, yeah.
Kathleen, any reflections on what Christina or Carla has said, and also what would you like to see in the next report?
Well, I think all of us, whatever country we're in, need to take a deep dive look at this and talk to stakeholders in our own place going forward. In the next SOFA, I would really like to see some case studies from low-income countries, middle-income countries. You know, that again, in the U.S., we've had an important study on corn production in Minnesota. We've had a true cost accounting of school meals. We have several different studies. I need to know more about what's going on globally, and I think the next SOFA can help that. I also hope that the next SOFA will provide some clear pathways for policymakers about how to embed TCA in governmental decision making. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. So I think that's the really overarching challenge of the next SOFA.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. Andrea, a few words, because I think it's very clear that there's interest, but they want much more.
And we hope to give much more. But points are well taken, and they're very good points. The benefit side, Kathleen touched upon the point. I didn't go into the details of this in my presentation, but in the report, benefits are considered as negative hidden costs. So, for example, if you transform degraded land back into forest, that is a benefit to society that may not be recognized. Farmers or the landowners don't receive payment, therefore it is calculated as a negative hidden cost. So there are benefits that are included in the report. Now, it has to be said that we all tend to externalize costs, internalize benefits. Kathleen mentioned about externality. So the costs that we impose on society, we have through regulation or incentives a way of saying, well, I need to take care of this. You know, we don't take it up, right? And so what happens for some things that may look like hidden benefits, when you look at how we take into account economic transactions, they're not completely hidden, right? So let's say that, I don't know, in Europe, there's at least at one point in time, there was a lot of discussion about multifunctionality of agriculture, that it provides many different types of services. And it's true, right? So now the issue is, are the farmers being compensated for these services or not? So they're not, but it could be that somebody else in society is capturing those benefits, such as the tourism sector, for example, because you have a beautiful agricultural landscape, I don't know, in Switzerland. So in the GDP, so in what we consider the economic system, those hidden benefits are in fact already included, right? So that is where the methodological complexities, because also the challenging thing is to convey how these hidden costs relate to what we are used to thinking about the economic system, which is kind of brings us back to GDP, because that's what we hear in the news, that's what, you know, what statistics report. In terms of the evolution, right, after SOFA 2023, we really do look forward to feedback from countries on the numbers. And in fact, what Kathleen mentioned about land use change is something that I, in fact, had pointed out to her. I said, look, I'm not very convinced about this. We need to look into it. And so that's the type of work we would like to do in the next year. And we are, as I mentioned, preparing country profiles to make it easier for people in countries to say, you know, this isn't quite right. Now, in terms of taking a deep dive and how to embed TCA policymaking, I think, you know, there is a distinction to be made relative to this global report in 2023 and what we hope to do in 2024, which is having more targeted studies. So that will focus more, I mean, less on the specific counting the monetary cost necessarily, and more on, okay, what do different actions, what would they entail in reducing these impacts? And you may monetize them, you may not, but at the core, you're trying to look at things from this multidimensional perspective. So that's the important aspect of this type of work, of true cost accounting, that you carry it in. And then you may hone in on specific things that the policymakers or stakeholders find more important. And that's That's what we hope to accomplish with SOFA 2024 and have more of these deep dives and envision how you can embed TCA and make it also more accepted. I mean, having this notion that, okay, we have to look at these different costs at the same time, just having people familiarized with this idea, which is relatively new, although there is a community that has been working on this for a number of years.
As you say, it's a work in progress, and I'm sure that we would also have views from our speakers, but I really want to go to the audience here. If you have a question, thank you. It's always helps sitting in the front row. Just say who you are and who you would like to answer your question. If you've got a comment, can you say it's a comment? Because otherwise I can be quite irritating and say, what's your question? So if you've got a comment, please say what it is. Sir, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. I think that I can speak in Spanish because I think that we have interpretation. So I will use multilingualism.
Yes, if you could just wait one moment. Only because my Spanish is not at the level that most probably the people on the panel have it.
Thank you very much.
Please.
Well, Christine understands and Carla, perfect Spanish. So I'm the ambassador from Argentina, and I would like to ask two questions to Andrea. Primero, quiero felicitar a los organizadores de este evento, el excelente nivel de las panelistas. Me encanta que sean tres mujeres brillantes, que siempre es una demostración donde tenemos la posibilidad de mostrar el valor agregado que significa tener tan brillantes expositoras en un panel como este. Pero las preguntas van a ir básicamente a la FAO, a Andrea, como pobre Andrea es el que va a tener que intentar responder esto, pero seguramente el mastermind que está al lado tuyo, que es Máximo, podrá también seguramente ayudar. Yo lo que quisiera preguntar, y reconozco que no he leído el SOFA porque hay otras reuniones paralelas, pero lo voy a leer, como lo hago siempre. ¿Cuáles serían los indicadores comunes sobre los que se basa la métrica que aplica el documento? Es decir, vemos que hay una cierta mayor precisión respecto a los países desarrollados y menos precisión respecto de los países en desarrollo. Es decir, ¿la herramienta es útil aún sin contar con metodologías acordadas? Esa sería la primera pregunta. Quizás la respuesta sería en los próximos SOFA será de otra manera o será parte de un proceso. Pero mi pregunta primaria es esa. Y la segunda, si me permiten hacerlas juntas, es si los llamados costos escondidos no podrían ser superados en los países en desarrollo, por ejemplo, a través de la transferencia de tecnología, la construcción de capacidades y el acceso a financiación justa para infraestructura. Porque creo que es siempre importante en este tipo de debates tratar de, como lo ha dicho Andrea en su presentación, tener una visión multidimensional y también claramente plural de enfoques. Así que con estas dos preguntas le agradezco la oportunidad de poder ver algún feedback de parte de la FAO. Gracias.
Thank you. Just in case anybody didn't have their interpretation, and I think the questions were, is the tool useful when there's no agreed methodology, and can these hidden costs be overcome by building capacity and technological transfer? Over to you, Andrea.
Sure. So just to make sure I understood the first question, because there were several points, the fact that, I mean, you were saying the indicators, there are some indicators that are more precise in high-income countries and less precise in low-income countries, and how much can these be used to kind of guide policymaking, let's say, to make decisions, and I think it's early for that, right? I mean, I think at least this SOFA and the work that has been done up to now in true cost accounting, that before actually was more a kind of regional and global, I think it's more, as we said, a kind of raising awareness of what the main priorities are, and probably for policymakers and stakeholders, it's not going to be a huge surprise, right? That what the main items are. And but where I think true cost accounting as a methodology, and it is very broad, right? You can kind of pick and choose what is the true cost accounting method that you will need to apply in your context, right? So it may be, for example, that a policymaker or a private sector is specifically interested on the impact of a value chain, I don't know, cocoa or something else, right? And then you would go in and focus much more in depth on that, less on the specific indicator, but also thinking about, okay, who are the stakeholders? What is at play? So I think that's where it becomes interesting for policymakers. So this report gives a general picture and gives a general sense also to countries where they are relative to others. And in fact, some countries have mentioned it, that it's useful for them to get a sense of where they are in the spectrum of hidden costs. So I think it's the beginning of a process. Right? So I wouldn't say that I would use the SOFA report to guide. I mean, we illustrate the entry points, but it would be next year's SOFA that is, I think, more instructive on what can be done to reduce the cost. And the second question, it's definitely yes. I think there are a lot of levers there, right? And that's where I think it's interesting when you start to have a more targeted assessments where you have stakeholders say, well, these are the 5-6 levers that we think we can really touch upon, right? And it's knowledge transfer, capacity building, as you mentioned, or it may be specific in aspects of linking to consumers' habits or how you support agriculture. So that's where I think it becomes more interesting. And the fact that it is not just about hidden costs and prices, but it is about capacity development, thinking about how private capital is mobilized and how it's, how in what directions, and much more so, civil society has a role to play. So over to you.
Christina would also like to address your question.
I would add to this that in the end you also need to have some policy actions. Huh? I mean, I'm thinking taxes, repurposing of subsidies, marketing, everything you presented. I think you cannot just solve this by technology transfer. I mean, sorry, it's like giving them again explanations, I mean, we also need that and we have the technology and we need other measures. So I think it has to go way beyond that.
Thank you very much for your question. And of course, you can ask the question in any of the 6 UN languages. So please feel free. Thank you, sir. The microphone will come round.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je vais m'exprimer en français. Donc, je suis conseiller agricole à l'ambassade de France. Donc, merci beaucoup pour la présentation du rapport et pour la présentation de la logique qui est très intéressante. Je me posais quand même une question, en fait, qui est plus sur la communication prévue par la FAO sur ce rapport. Puisque vous avez expliqué votre choix, que je comprends, de travailler sur 2 ans avec une première année qui présenterait, je dirais, les true costs et une deuxième année qui présenterait des initiatives pays, des exemples de solutions. Mais en faisant ce choix, que je comprends parce que c'est un important travail, vous avez quand même derrière un aspect communication qui est important. Je regardais ce matin le titre sur votre rapport d'un grand journal français qui est « Les coûts cachés des systèmes alimentaires sont de 10% du PIB au niveau mondial et de plus de 10 000 milliards de dollars ». Donc c'est des chiffres qui sont dans le rapport. Hein. Ma question est la suivante, en fait, c'est que souvent les journaux, et ça c'est écrit en gros le titre, bon, l'article est plus modéré mais le titre est très gros, c'est souvent les journaux ne lisent pas tous les rapports dans les détails. Et en présentant, je dirais, les coûts une année, puis les solutions possibles une deuxième année, est-ce que vous ne prenez pas quand même un risque de communication assez élevé cette première année? C'est-à-dire que soit retenu uniquement dans les grands médias l'aspect coût et pas l'aspect solution.
Andrea, indeed. Headlines, journalists like headlines. They need consumers to read their work. But the communication strategy, is it risky, I think, was the idea behind the question.
Well, I mean, we were concerned about what was going to be picked up in the report, right? I mean, the report touches on many different aspects. Some of them are already geared towards solutions, for example, right? But we knew that at the end of the day, the media would pick up on the global costs, global hidden costs. So what we did is that we went actually quite conservative, and the headline message is at the lower end of what many people who work on true cost accounting have put out. With this uncertainty analysis, it is, the probability that the costs are higher than 10 trillion is 95%. So it is a big number, it is a big title, but we did go conservative on the number that was being put out. Now, in terms of the communication for next year, that's going to be trickier, right? Because part of it is, the devil is in the details. So when you start proposing solutions that are specific to contexts and countries, media may pick up less of that, right? Now, you could do still, this is still in the making. So if you have a global analysis, for example, that looks at scenarios for repurposing agricultural support, you could say, well, how many of these costs can we reduce, right? Because one thing is to say, okay, you have 10 trillion in costs, but how much is it viable, given the policies that one can put in place, the labeling, the capacity development, and all? How many of these costs is it viable to reduce? So that could have communication potential, I think. But that's still in the making. We'll see.
Well, that's good that your report has made headlines this year, and next year, perhaps if you get the figures clear and simple, that will also make the journalists and media interested. Who else has a question, please? Sir, here, and then we'll go to the gentleman at the back afterwards. But first, your question.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Morten Osland, Norway's ambassador. Thank you for this presentation, and thank you for preparing this work. A very short comment and a very short question. The comment is, it seems to me that this is one utensil, and a valuable one, demonstrating the essential and time-urgent need for food systems transformation, globally and nationally. It is one instrument, but it's good in that sense. The question is, in your listing of different kinds or elements, if you like, of costs, are there some that were not included there? For example, the imprint on biodiversity, or on soil health, or the health of oceans. Now, in a sense, everything is involved here, and everything is connected, so it's hard to fathom and grasp everything. But that's still a question. There were many elements there, but there seem to be some more, which are also part of the hidden cost picture. Thank you very much.
Anything missing out?
So especially on the environmental side, there are a number of things that are missing. I mean, we acknowledge that in the report, and in fact, we say that the environmental, I may not have mentioned it in the presentation, but I did have it in mind, is that the environmental costs are an underestimate. They're very much a lower bound. You don't have, for example, impacts of pesticides. So we do have impact on biodiversity of land use change, but not, for example, or of some of the kind of nitrogen emissions, but you don't have those associated with pesticides, for example. Big impact on pollinators. So that is a potential hidden cost that would be very significant in these estimates. So, and that is driven for this report by the need of having a database that was a global database that could provide comparable estimates across many countries. But in fact, as you move towards looking at solutions with policymakers, it is desirable to say, okay, for us as a country X, it would be important to include this hidden cost or a hidden benefit if one has a way of figuring out the hidden benefit side, linking back to what I was saying about what is already included in GDP.
Thank you. Sir, please. Question. It seems that Andrea is getting all the questions here.
非常感谢。我用中文来提问。我是中国驻粮农代表处的副代表参赞。那么首先呢，我想祝贺 FAO 这个出版这个粮农的这个关于这个隐形报告的这么一个隐形成本的这个报告，我觉得这是很了不起的一份报告。因为在过去啊，我们谈到成本的时候，大家往往更关注的是这个表面上的我们能够想象得到的一些东西，但是对于隐性成本的确这个考虑的比较少。这儿呢，我有2个简单的问题。第一个呢，关于隐形成本的计算，那个指标体系的确立啊，这个指标啊，我个人认为是很复杂的，包罗的内容非常复杂。刚才那位大使也提到这个问题，生物多样性的问题啊，是吧？土壤的问题啊，碳汇的问题啊，等等，农药的问题啊，健康的问题啊，可能是非常复杂。这儿我想第一个问题我就想问，那么你第1年是吧出版这么一个报告，你确定的主要指标是吧，是不可能是包罗万象，我所有的都把它考虑进去。那么你确定目前这些指标的原则是什么？对不对？原则就是说你主要的要选择哪几个方面、哪几个领域的指标来计算这个隐形成本，这是我第一个问题。那么第2个问题呢，我就宏观的问一下，我大概有个想象，那么在发达国家和发展中国家指标之间进行对比，哪一个国家的隐形成本更高呢？宏观的回答我一下就行了，谢谢。
So 2 questions there about the criteria for these hidden costs and how we compare between developing and developed countries. Andrea.
Thank you for your question. So in terms of the criteria and the complexity, it is indeed challenging to do this study at a global level and reflecting on what should be in. As I mentioned, part of it was driven by global databases that were available. So global data on greenhouse gas emissions, on land use change, for example, that facilitates kind of having something that is comparable across countries. The other aspect that was being considered is let's try and include what we believe are the main components. So even on, let's say, the dietary side and nutrition side, there are things that are not taken into consideration because we didn't have the ability to do it, something that could be done in the future. Some of these environmental costs are the same. So the criteria is if I had to kind of condense it into one thing, is making sure that you're capturing the main costs and that you try to have at least a balance between the environmental, the social, and the health dimensions to understand and try and support prioritization. I would say that would be the main point. And in terms of the higher costs between developed or developing, as I was mentioning in my presentation, it kind of depends at how you look at it. So if you look at it in absolute terms, the highest costs are in high-income countries and middle-income countries linked to health issues due to dietary patterns. But these are also richer countries. So as a proportion as a burden on society, if you look at it in terms of income earning potential and how much this would impact the livelihoods of people if these costs have to be fully internalized, right, without acting on ways to reduce them, then it's low-income countries where the costs are highest relative to and it's mostly driven by the social side.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question from the gentleman there. I'm sure there are many questions which the FAO will be answering after this report, but if I can just go and then to the chief economist. We have to stop at 2. Bilaterally, I've been told, is where the question's coming. Please, Let's then go to Maximo Torero, Chief Economist of FAO, for his closing remarks.
No, apologies, but we have to stop at 2 because we have the joint committee running and many of the members are here. So let me briefly try to bring some elements. The first thing which the SOFA tried to do, and I am very happy that we took the decision of doing it in 2 years, because it's a very complex SOFA, and we discussed this a lot, and that's why we move forward and making the decision in the 2 years. So first, I think the goal was to set some standards on how to measure true cost accounting. That does not mean that our measure is the perfect measure and is the correct measure. We just want everybody to know how it is being done so that everybody understands how it is being done. This is similar to principles of accounting in financial systems. If you know the principles, you know what you are measuring, and you know when there is a scarcity of data, of course, and the constraints attached to that. But the transparency on how it is being measured, I think, is extremely important. And of course, this is a methodology that can evolve and improve over time, but the transparency is what we wanted to bring together, because what we were observing is that there were many studies coming out on true cost accounting, and they were so different in terms of methodological design behind them that you couldn't compare them. They are not comparable. So I think it's really important to come with this process, and that's what we're trying to do. So it doesn't need to be perfect, but everybody knows what we are doing so that we can compare things and we can understand things, and policymakers can have a better idea of what is going on. Second, despite of being preliminary and partial, I think the SOFA reports estimates of hidden costs to about 10% of the global GDP, and an underestimate that it was mentioned before, is a very strong message of the inaction and how it comes at a substantial cost. So action is needed, and these estimates are an unprecedented opportunity to inform policy and make agri-food systems more sustainable, inclusive, resilience, and especially a precondition to achieve the SDGs. So it's very important to understand that element. Third, applying the TCA is not without challenges. And we know that there are enormous challenges in data. And that's why certain topics of the environmental sector, for example, are not being taken into account. And this data scarcity on externalities and other hidden costs can constrain the update to scale up the TCA methodology. So we need to keep working on how we can reduce this methodological complexity and the data limitations, but not to always put data as an excuse to not to do things. We need to find ways to move forward and to try to use latest ways of data information and technologies to be able to close those gaps. Fourth, to transform the agri-food systems, we need to go a step further with the TCA to carry out more targeted analysis, to set priorities for transformation. And looking ahead, targeted TCA analysis will allow us to explore future scenarios, as it has been discussed, of change, so that we can identify the trade-offs and synergies among possible interventions and policy options. As one of the panelists mentioned, we're just starting the dialogue, but at least we are starting the dialogue with a common understanding of what we are doing, so that we can really move forward in this dialogue and try to work together with countries. The ultimate objective is informing the use of different available levers, whether these are policies, regulations, voluntary standards, technology and innovation, which is also, of course, extremely important, but policies clearly are central because of what we are observing and the problems that we are observing in terms of policy design. And finally, before one more, number 5, we need to be aware of the resistance to change and concern that is addressing the hidden cost of the agri-food systems, and that this could may lead to increasing food prices. That's why in Andrea's presentation it was very clear that we don't know. Maybe some commodities which are super processed and which are creating bigger negative externalities will end in higher prices. But the important thing here is how we can reallocate existing resources and support to the agricultural sector so that we can understand where the incentives should be put in place to minimize those externalities. And just to follow on the comment of the Ambassador of Brazil, of course, we have the benefits, as Andrea explained, incorporated, but also we need to enhance more the benefits of the agri-food systems. And that's the goal here, because there are so many good things that could happen with a better policy-oriented agri-food systems that we need to enhance, because it's the right to food. We are creating good quality of food. So that's central. So although the changes could be disruptive, I think it's important to have a clear picture of what is happening and to better understand how we can do that. And finally, I think the idea here is like a step moving forward. is movement towards the implementation of the process of the agri-food system transformation or transition, which will give us information for a better policy design to achieve this. I think we take this as steps that we need to move forward, but what we want at the end is to enhance these benefits of the agri-food systems rather than to hear all these complaints of the agri-food system affecting our land, affecting our soils, affecting our water, creating emissions. I think it's on the opposite. The agri-food systems create enormous good things that we can enhance even more, and we need to attract investment to the agri-food system, including, of course, climate investment, because what we want at the end is good food for today and for tomorrow. And that's what we can achieve with a better transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Torero, and thank you to our speakers, the ambassador from Switzerland, Brazil, Kathleen for getting up so early in the morning, the executive director of the Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems, Andrea, of course. That's all for now. You can find much more information on the FAO website and a recording of this panel discussion. So thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.